The Nephilim sightings are going to start soon.
Consciousness has been enslaved.
Your consciousness does not need your physical body to survive.
It's the thing that's necessary, it has to be there. It's the coding that projects this world we currently live in.
He said, I want you to read the Bible.
We got reptilians on just outside of our frequency zone.
Six-dimensional beings, the ancient builder race.
Ideas are the highest form of intelligence, and that leads you to truth and clarity.
The Nephilim sightings are going to start soon.
Conspiracy and chill.
If obviously aliens are galaxies insanely huge, we're just one planet.
They would have needed a minimum of 6 feet of lead shielding in order to get through the 25,000-mile thick Van Allen radiation belt.
This is real. They really did fake the moon landing.
The world is infinitely older than that. And I mean the world with human beings in it.
Skull and Bones is like one of the villains in the Legion of Doom.
He said, I want you to read the Bible.
The biblical flood, the Tartaria mud flood.
Conspiracy and chill.
The Nephilim sightings are going to start soon.
The bull god ball.
He said, I want you to read the Bible.
There's magnets in the basketballs.
There was a political party, a third party called the Anti-Masonic Party at a point in the United States.
The Global Pandemic Treaty.
Conspiracy and Chill podcast.
My legal name is Shane Bales. I go by Shane Sedore because I was adopted when I was like 6 to facilitate a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today. I'm what's considered an Illuminati whistleblower, even though I don't believe that the Illuminati is a real word. I think of it more like an internet meme or kind of a placeholder for a concept and idea, which is that, our world is run by cults, and there is a cult that has infiltrated all of those cults to make sure that all those cults do what cults do. And, the top of the pyramid would be a small group of people that, going back to about 11,000 years ago, were convinced that their bloodlines were somehow superior, and so they tried to keep the power in a bloodline situation for, a few thousand years, and eventually, today that's all fallen away from them, so the bloodlines don't matter as much, but the family names still do, and the tie-ins and the ownership of properties and corporations and all of those things still do. So nowadays I actually call the Illuminati the Umbrella Corporation, which I stole from Resident Evil, because that's a lot more of what they represent, because it's not so much the bloodlines like it used to be. It's more just people who are willing to play along with their systems and follow along with their cults and make sure that culture creation happens the way that they want it to. I come from families that are related to those bloodlines I mentioned, and over the years what they've done is just kind of monitor those bloodlines for people who have what they call hypersensory perceptions, latent psychic abilities, things like that. And I was identified very young as being one of those people, and so they started to indoctrinate me into their various cults. And they were grooming me, if I can use that word, hopefully YouTube doesn't hear it the wrong way. They were grooming me for a specific type of role within their organization. And in order for that to happen, they needed to give me kind of an overview of how all these cults worked. So I became kind of an expert on cults, but not a specific one, just how they all kind of work in concert to, infiltrate the governments and everything else on the planet. It's what we call culture creation. So basically leading society around in a way that has a specific outcome that they have predetermined. So I started that when I was about 4. When I was about 19, I was trying to get out. I tried to get out before that. It didn't go so well, but at 19, I kind of put my foot down that I was either going to kill myself or they were going to let me out. So you can get out of these things. It just comes at a pretty high price, and it takes some time. So I started that process when I was 19, and it ended between 26 and 30 as an example. And since then, I've been kind of free of them, other than I speak publicly about my experiences with them and get the occasional slap on the wrist from a former employer or something like that. But other than that, I try to talk people down off the conspiracy ledge more often than I put them up on it, or help coax them out of rabbit holes that they're a little bit too stuck in, more than I like to shove them down it. But that's kind of been my overview. That involved what people in the conspiracy community would typically call mystery schools. So, a whole other education system that's based on a whole other understanding of history, a whole other understanding of science, a whole other understanding of just about any topic you could think of. And also at the same time, simultaneously going through the public school system so that I could understand the differences, basically understanding how the public are being indoctrinated into one path while they are actually hiding this whole other path from us.
So when you were young, these people kind of sought you out and indoctrinated you with their ideology?
Yeah, no, that was where it starts, right? I'm not unique. There's, probably like thousands, millions of people who have been, kind of swooped up into, especially in the modern times when they got away from the bloodlines, which I'll kind of get into more, their programs, projects, and cults. But yeah, because of the family tie, they identified me quickly. And then because of my abilities in the way that they wanted, because they study human potential and they've been turning it into technology, but because I had those abilities, they wanted to use me to study them. And so where it starts is I was basically gifted to someone who was a higher level member of theirs. Almost, I apologize if this triggers anyone in the audience, but it was considered a pet. I was a pet to this person, and they were more or less what you guys might know as a handler. So they would be a person that I was kind of indentured to and would make sure that my education followed what they wanted it to, and so on. And that person I can't name. One of the main rules of getting out was to keep names and locations secret, which is more for your protection than mine. But the idea is, not to name names and locations. But as an example, my first handler was a publicly known politician figure up here in Canada. So.
It's like you're using your powers to get in my head, because I was just going to ask you, did it have anything to do with government, or was it kind of just separate from that?
It's not always government. I mean, it's police forces, it's fire departments, it's education system, it's religions, it's anything that shapes society. They have a finger in for that reason. So the members can be and are in all of those different groups. And one of the things that I see people online trying to always do is like boil it down to like one race or one cult or one group of, these are the masterminds, and they've been very clever to make sure that they're in all of them so that you can't actually do that. And another thing I always say is like the highest members of their organization, we don't know their names. If you make it in the public world, everybody knows your name, but as soon as you make it in their world, nobody's going to ever be able to find your name.
So where would you recommend starting?
I'm not sure. It depends on what you guys want to hear about, really, because I could go in a million different directions myself. But so to boil down basically what they've been doing, especially since around the end of World War II, they broke up into basically three categories, which are programs, projects, and cults. Cults, that's obvious, and cults have always existed. Projects would be when they start to bring cult ideologies into society, right? When they start to, teach a certain country, a certain religion, and get them all indoctrinated into that over history. Those would be considered projects. And so in modern day, it's more, getting certain curriculums into schools, getting certain projects into Netflix, things like that. But that would be the idea of a project, is bringing things that came from the cults into society. And then the programs came a little bit later. They're run by the cults, but what a program refers to is them basically learning human potential, things like magic, things like psychic abilities, telekinesis, all of that different stuff, which we now know the CIA has been playing with as well. That's one of the type of things, right? But being able to learn all of that stuff and then kind of do what they have done through the CIA, where they make us all believe that it was bunk and it was nonsense. And well, meanwhile, they were measuring it and studying it to a point where they've been able to recreate it all with technology. And the reason why they've done that is because if you know how to do magic and you know how to do these things for yourself, you're dangerous to them. But if you have all of those same things with technology, you're probably not going to think that you're just actually capable of those things. So there's a famous quote through Arthur C. Clarke that's actually kind of reversed, which is technology indistinguishable from magic. Right. And so that kind of feeds us into being like, these aliens have all these hidden technology that's indistinguishable from magic, which is true. But, the magic is something that we have already had in history. And so a lot of what the occult has been is burying all of that truth, hiding all of that human potential, what we might call or consider to be magic and psychic abilities, things like that, telling us the truth out of one side of their face, but also fictionalizing it out of the same side of their face, all the while selling back to us technology that just mimics what we're already capable of. So that's what the programs were for, was to bring people who had psychic abilities, were mediums, anything you could think of that kind of falls into that ballpark, test them, run them through a series of different, diagnostic machines as example, so that they could measure all of the things that make it happen. And then telling the public that it's not possible and everybody thinks that this is crazy and should be cast off to the side into the fringe, while they sell us technology that they learned how to create based on that. So it's funny because we always call it reverse engineered technology, and in that sense it's also true, because they're reverse engineering us into technology. Not to say that they're not also, to follow your imagery, reverse engineering other technologies as well, but yeah.
Wow. I guess I got a two-parted question. So when you were young and you were exhibiting, what was it like you were spiritually sensitive, you kind of had like clairvoyance, or you were showing like signs of psychic? Like, how was it discovered? And like, was it by the school, or like what exactly was it? So then, and then the other half, before I forget, is when you said that they were indoctrinating you from a young age, was it to do with that type of stuff? Like just like a totally different worldview? Was it spiritual? Was it kind of like, oh, we're better than everyone else, you're like special, you're this?
Yeah, that for the second half of your practice, that's the dangling carrot that keeps everybody in that, right? Is we're special, we're better than you, right? And a lot of people believe that and they follow that. But going back to the beginning of your question, I was freaking my relatives out by doing things that children shouldn't be able to do. I guess the way my mother told the story was I didn't talk until I was about 3, and when I did, they found me sitting in my room staring at a wall and speaking word for word all of the Never-Ending Story. It was the movie The Never-Ending Story.
Great movie.
I'd only seen and they said I was just staring at a wall running through the script, and it scared the bejesus out of everybody. And then it's like I was answering questions that weren't being asked to me and things like that shortly following that. And so a member of my family is he's dead now, but he was a very high level Freemason, is what we would call a worshipful Grand Master of Freemasonry. And he found out and just basically handed me in, or turned me in. Oh, I found one. Here's one. He happens to be related to me. So that was where it started. And then what they do is they kind of, they nurture those abilities, right? They teach me more about why I can pick up thoughts from people. They explain to me why, occasionally when I get really mad, things will go flowing across the room, or the weather will change along with these, and how to control that and make it not happen, or like you mentioned, use it in specific cases, right? And so for a lot of the kids who got used in programs, they weren't as conscious of it as I was, which we'll have to get back to, but that's a lot of what they were doing, was using the human potential for their own gain as well, before they had the technology really rolled out. At this point, they don't really need the human influence in the same way, but building up to that, like through the 80s and into the 90s, basically up until around 2012, they definitely needed, magicians, if you will, to control the world in the way that they do. And the second part of your question, I almost forgot already.
Like what kind of teachings were they?
Oh, the what they were building me for and what they were teaching me. Okay, so obviously I needed to understand what they believe. So they gave me their entire understanding of history and what they believe and all of that. And I got to see it from a bunch of different points of view so that I could have that nice overview of it. And I'm always been meant to believe that too. So as I'm growing up through this, it's like they'll tell me something is the truth, right? Like just pick something arbitrary. Like they give me a version of the Bible and tell me that's the truth. Right. And so for a long time, I believe that it is, and I'm kind of looking at the world through that perspective. And then they're like, actually, that wasn't the truth. Here, read this one now. Right. And there's a bunch of different stages like that along my upbringing. And that was kind of how they were leading me through all of this. But it was all meant so that I would end up with maybe not just their ideologies, but also their worldview. So that, yes, I would look at myself as special, and I would look at people like they're stupid, and I would believe that we were the shepherds to all of you sheep and everything that they believe in that way, which was the problem that they always had with me, is that that was the part I could never accept, right? I did not buy that ever. It was going against my soul, let's put it that way. And so that was the part that would always actually make me fight back, but that is what they believe. And so what they wanted from me was eventually to be some type of entertainer or public speaker who would share their ideology in a very convincing way. And basically what I do is take all of the same things that they've taught me and use it despite them, to tell people the truth, even when they don't want to hear it, because a lot of the people in the conspiracy world, I pop bubbles, because a lot of the stuff in the conspiracy world is just made up and built on top of made up and built on top of made up. It might point to something that's real, but it's what I call a conspiracy snowball, where they started with some like fresh snow and they started the snowball, but then when they couldn't find any more snow, they just kind of rolled it around in some grass and dirt until they found more snow. And so we end up with this really dirty snowball at the end of the day. But yeah.
When you were younger and reciting the never-ending story and answering questions that weren't necessarily asked to you, did you see like any beings or entities, or was there some kind of power that was maybe like putting these seeds in your brain, or do you remember anything like that?
Where spirits sit, it's kind of a dimension that's just layered over on top of this one, and that's been one of my abilities since, yes, I was probably born. My entire life I've maintained it. I can see both. Kind of tune between the two whenever I feel like it. So entities, if you will, disembodied spirits, things like that have always kind of been around me. I don't think that had any influence particularly at that time, other than that was also one of the things that I was capable of or reacting to that had them pull me in the first place. And definitely one of the abilities that they nurtured the most, because it's and the way I describe it to people, you probably hear when people have like a ghost experience or something, then it kind of follows them, they end up having a bunch more, right? And that is literally because we have these switches in our brain that allow us to like discern between different dimensions or spectrums of information, both in sound and in light. And so those switches get flipped in people's minds when they have their brains, when they have that first experience, and that's why it leads to more. And so I just have a bunch of those flipped, and they went in and helped flip more to make me stronger in that, basically. But that does, again, as much as they might want me to believe that I was special while they were doing this to me, I'm very highly aware that all human beings have this potential. It's just, it's not nurtured, right? It's that difference between nature and nurture. These abilities are within our nature. They're just not nurtured.
Can you give us an example of some of the conspiracy snowballs that were built on fallacies?
A lot of this stuff having to do with aliens, because most of it is directing around human involvement, right? Directing away from human involvement and kind of scapegoating, if you will, something we'll never find, something we'll never catch. And so that's a big one. Within the conspiracy world, you end up getting into things like super soldiers and secret space program experiencers and things like that. And most of them are, once again, kind of repeating a lore, basically, that started with disinformation and just continued being more experiencers coming forward, regurgitating their own flavor of that information, and then that testimony kind of added on to the next one, right? And they, generation after generation, to the point where that snowball was never, the very core of that snowball is just dirt. And so those are examples of how it would work. And that was by design. That was something that back when they were still indoctrinating me, it was before the internet had really taken off, and they were preparing for it. And that was one of the ways in which they were doing it. The conspiracy movement kind of started in libraries and rec halls and people's basements and stuff like that. So they were infiltrating it back then, getting disinformation about all of the topics we talk about in there, just to make us constantly chase our tail and create a bunch of rabbit holes that don't need to be there, that eventually we get trapped in and stuck in, or fall in and spend too long in. And when the internet came along, they knew that we would just run with that ball from there, right? As soon as we could freely share information, everyone can share their story and all of these things. They knew exactly how that would all play out. So, And then we're in the middle of it now, where leading up to 2020, with what I call the joy hit the world. Since then, we've had a lot more people come into conspiracy realms, right? Start looking into conspiracy, and they end up tripping and falling into all of these very deep rabbit holes that are conspiracy snowballs. Something like the secret space program, if you guys have never delved into that, my friend Ryder actually calls that a conspiracy burrito, because it's literally every aspect of the conspiracy community all wrapped up into one burrito, and these people experience all of it, right? So that was all by design to get us so that when we got to this point, once again, we wouldn't be able to actually find the truth, even though it is right in front of us, because it's just the water's so muddy.
The alien aspect, a lot of people are kind of picking up on that being bullcrap, and with you being spiritually sensitive and saying, being able to discern between the spirit realm or encounter entities and stuff, and then no shortage of occult conspiracies relating to these cults, or like believing that their bloodline is related to some ancient entities or spirits or whatever. So what kind of beliefs did they teach as far as like far out things to do with spirits, or like the entities they were trying to contact or serve, or like so-called satanic groups and whatnot?
Well, it's a variety. Each cult has kind of their own flavor, but I'll give you the kind of overview of what the tip of the pyramid believes. Their history goes back to about 100 to 120,000 years ago, when whatever planet Earth was at that time got forever changed by the arrival of some type of spaceship, and that spaceship bared the name Atlantis, and that spaceship eventually contained aliens, and that those aliens came down and started interacting with us and formed a civilization that they eventually called Atlantis. And that civilization existed here right up until about 30,000 years ago in some shape or form. And so a lot of what they believe starts with that, right? That, whatever humans were back then kind of mixed with these Atlanteans, and we ended up with a different version of human. And then at about the 30,000 year mark, they have another introduction of more or less the same thing, which is where these reptilians start coming in, which is that there was another group of, again, off-world species that we would call aliens, who came down and took that version of human and changed it genetically and gave birth to what we are today. And so what the Illuminati believe is that they're the first version of that project, and that's why their bloodline is special. And the rest of us are all a subversion of that. And obviously you guys are probably hearing that echoing Zacharias Sitchin and the Anunnaki and things of that nature, right? But that group would once again be the authors of those stories, so that once again we're constantly chasing this name and this word Anunnaki, which is not even a name, looking for a species behind it that is not there. And so from there, they believe, the Illuminati believes, that they were put in charge by this alien race, more or less, to control civilization, to create culture, basically, and be our shepherds, as I've said before. I use that word because it's their word, and it's a good indicator of the way that they view us as sheep, and they're the shepherds, right? Or their parents and we're children is a lot closer to the words that they would use. And that's more or less how they treat us, if you think about it, the way that they do lie to the public and whatnot, right? And it's like everything's a Santa Claus story or a Satan Claus story, and so there's that aspect of it right at its core. And then Satanism becomes kind of that same belief structure and all of the same ideology, just brought down to taking it away from aliens and bringing it just into the spirit realm, right? Where we now are dealing with angels and demons. And angels and demons, and as far as we've ever dealt with them, are a part of the planet. This is what we call interdimensional beings, disembodied souls, things like that. You might call them ghosts sometimes, you might call them poltergeists sometimes, you might call them demons. We have a variety of different names because there's a variety of different types. But most of their knowledge, if you will, isn't coming from aliens. It's coming from those interdimensional beings that they're interacting with, using people like me who can interact with them, or through various types of rituals that can temporarily what you might call thin the veil between our world and theirs, or our dimension and theirs, so that they can have a little bit more of an interaction. So I said a lot right there, but what's relevant to us really kind of does fit within the last 400 years and has nothing to do with aliens truly, other than the humans involved are aware of an alien history on our planet. And so they're aware of certain sites, certain areas of the planet where things have been buried that do belong to that old world. And so, especially over the last 200 years, they've been doing everything they can to find those places and dig them up and recover whatever they can from them. Your country's war with the Middle East was all about that, to be honest. It's just like getting these different pieces of technology, which brings us back to the reverse engineering and the alien component of the reverse engineering. It's not that, we have these, I hear it in the mainstream that we get these donations from aliens or whatever, but it's more that they know that there's things underground that they were able to dig up that allowed them to reverse engineer and create new technologies. And that's the majority of the story. Obviously, the universe is filled with life, and there are exceptions to that basis or that base, but that's the majority of what's going on. Is they have a understanding of science and technology that is a completely different pathway to what they allow us in the mainstream world to know about.
I'm sure, being a Canadian, you know what Oak Island is.
Yep.
Could that be one of the places where something may be buried?
Could be. I have to, that's a rule. I have to be careful. I could use the one because it's a bag.
I hear you. The other thing I was going to say is you kind of explained right there what the people at the very tippy top of the pyramid believe. What did your findings kind of lead you to believe? The same things?
Well, I mean, in terms of the logistics of it, yes. I don't agree with any of their ideologies. Like I don't believe that humans are as irresponsible as they believe humans to be. I do believe that we've just never had the opportunity to find out. And I don't agree with this control structure that's been there for that long, that has never allowed us the opportunity to find out without getting scolded for it or ostracized or even killed for it. However, like, their understanding of history is correct. This is becoming easier to talk about these days because of people like Graham Hancock becoming kind of popular, because he's pointing back to that, what they call the Younger Dryas impact theory, right? Like that idea that about 13,000 years ago, something happened and that reset civilization. And that is true. And the Illuminati are the people who basically brought the knowledge forward after all of that.
Something that's dear to my conspiracy heart and just everything. Well, first, if I had to take a guess, Shane, you're probably Irish, are you not? You look like a Druid. You got the big beard. And
it's in my family, yeah, for sure.
And what I was gonna say is, I feel like Druids play a huge part in this. That they were like one of the remnants of, somebody who preserved what we would call magic or human potential, as you were saying, and other abilities and like an innate knowledge of like the realm that we live in and stuff. And that's why they were so targeted, and they had to go. Like, in history, they were targeted big time by the Roman Empire, by the English Empire, by the churches. Like, everyone wanted to get rid of the Druids.
Yeah. And if you follow the history I just laid out when I said it's only really been the last 400 years, it's really only been the last 400 years for that too. All of that magic and the Druids and various groups like that were all tolerated up till about 400 years ago, when they started changing things the way that they have, and especially in the last 200 years. But yeah, we call pagan religions anything that's not Christianity, basically, at that point, right? And anything that does, it's not a one religion. There was a variety of them, the Druids being one of them. But the thing that they all had in common does come from that older version of humans, right? And pre-Atlantean even time, where we are kind of like Tolkien's elves in Lord of the Rings, where we, like, our connection to the planet is so strong and in harmony that we don't need the modern technologies as we know them now. And there's just different pathways to all of it. And you guys in the conspiracy world, I'm sure you've had Tartaria come up as an example, right? And
Sure.
all of that is pointing to the fact that, especially when the United States was formed, but there's been different pockets of this all over the planet for years, is a lot of those buildings pointed to different pathways to technology. that they didn't want us to know about. So they needed to be destroyed and or buried when the settling of North America was happening, or resettling of North America was happening. And this new world was being created so that, they could keep us on all of the energy sources and the types of technology, what I call pathways to technology, that we currently use because of money and control. Yeah.
Wild. And as far as the timeline, do you have any theories of your own then? Like, how old was some of these civilizations when there was these resets? Like a lot of the Tartaria stuff seems to allude that it was within kind of the timeline you said, the past 200 years, that things really got reset and wiped out. So is there a certain chronology that you were taught in that, or that you've come to, subscribe to yourself?
Yeah, so it was about 400 years ago where, let's say, the people who control the Illuminati were kind of giving the Illuminati a choice to just share with all of us everything, or to try and keep their structure. And their choice was to keep their structure. And then about 200 years went by of basically people getting soft because they didn't have that backing that they were so used to, and they weren't keeping up all their disciplines and practices and magic and everything else. So coming up to about 200 years ago, they recognized, we're in trouble. We need to figure out a different pathway to do this. And that's where technology started coming in. And so in order to facilitate that in a coming future, they needed to basically erase the history of what was there so that we didn't ever have that to fall back or look back on. And then from there, that's when we start to get into the timeline that we all know, where they, have basically since the 1800s giving us a completely false history of what North America was. And, even other parts of the world, both of the world wars, they destroyed a lot of very vital things, right? And we all know that now in history, but nobody really noticed at the time that was also by design. And both ended up setting up the world as we know it now. So before that, I guess, there's a bunch of different things we could go into, but again, their history and the world as it is now starts about 13,000 years ago at the end of that major destruction. Where we were at that point is Graham Hancock is not very far off. So we had a bunch of different pockets of humans that survived what had gone on. And, they were left without their technology and without their sciences and without everything that they had their civilization as they had it. So they were all back in a rebuilding phase for a long period of time, which kind of didn't bring them all the way back to hunter-gatherers, like Graham might say, but pretty close, right? Like they had to get back in touch with all of the old ways of doing things. All the while that was going on, that group that created the Illuminati had their own patch on Earth where they were planning to share what they knew with all these different pockets, right? And so when you follow Graham Hancock's work and a lot of even what Zachariah Sitchin posits with the Anunnaki stories, that idea that from somewhere else came this group of men, the group of humans, who then came along and started sharing technology again, and sharing sciences again, and sharing spirituality again, and knowledge of the stars and all those things again. And so that is true. But that group is where the Illuminati starts. And that's just basically how they kept everything under control for forever. And, as adjustments were needed, they came. Like Christianity is an adjustment, right? So when they started to lose control, they needed to create a new pathway for control. And so that religion was formed as an example. Not the only example, but an example.
What can you tell us about Antarctica, if anything?
Well, right now it's covered in ice, but when it's not covered in ice, it kind of looks like the rest of the world. And this planet goes through cycles where those ice caps, if you will, come and go. Right now they're there, but, not too far into our future, that ice is going to go away, and we're going to start to see what was there. And it's really just, again, proof of that older history of this planet, right? That's a lot of what the conspiracy is making us believe that we're only, however old they like to say that we are. They like with the dating of the pyramids being less than 5,000 years old as an example, where now we're figuring out they're a lot older than that. That type of conspiracy is exactly what it's been about. They don't want us to know that, humans have been on this planet in the kind of form of similar form to what we are now for 100,000 years, when they've been telling us that 10,000 years ago we were, cavemen, basically. And that's a lot of it.
Something we ask a lot of guests is just general paranormal or, you know, what's your weird experience type of questions. But I think it goes a lot deeper and further if we're going to ask you the same.
I mean, I could pick one. I have like, you know, the kind that I would call normal, right? I worked security for a long time for MLSE, which is the company that owns the Leafs and the Raptors. I looked after a few of their buildings. One of the buildings that I was looking after is it's on the exhibition grounds in Canada. It's where we had our World Fair when you guys had yours in Chicago and San Francisco. We had one here, and it's a piece of land owned by the Queen, still kind of operated, even though it's in Toronto, independently of Toronto. But it's very haunted grounds. We used it during World War II to basically bring a bunch of people over here and hang them. But the barracks were also there and various things. So there's a lot of, let's say, ghost activity on the grounds that, you know, everybody who worked for me pretty much would have an experience, even if they didn't believe it. So, I mean, I could run through a bunch of those but as an example, that are pretty normal. So an example, we would have, when the Marlies weren't playing there, which is like the AHL team for Toronto, when the Marlies weren't playing there, they would rent the ice out to like local hockey leagues within Toronto, like men's hockey leagues, pickup leagues. And so we were having a night of those games and everyone had gone home. And one of the things I always did at night was go around and check the bathrooms. And so I was doing that. And with a woman's bathroom, I'd always push the door open and say, "Security, is anyone in there?" before I would enter, because, you know, manners. And so I did that one night where I was expecting the building to be empty. And someone was like, "Oh yeah, I'm in here." It was a woman's voice. I was like, "Oh, sorry, I'll wait," right? And so I kind of waited, went down a small flight of steps, waited about 15, 20 feet from the door where I could see the door, waiting for her to come out. She didn't come out because I needed to escort her out whenever she came out. She wasn't supposed to be there, whoever she was. She never came out. So I went back and I pushed the door open again. I'm like, "Security, is anyone in here?" No answer. So at this point I go, "Security, I'm coming in." No answer. So I go in, go through, check all the stalls. Nobody's in there. And just at that moment, I think to myself, "Oh, it must have been a ghost." And I hear the same voice start laughing. As an example, yeah. We had a resident ghost that people would either see or hear on a regular basis, even without hearing about it ahead of time. This one area, we call it the West Annex, people would hear like keys jingling, or they would see an old man with thick glasses, like Coke bottle glasses and suspenders, look like he was dressed for 20 years ago, walking around with this big ring of keys on his belt. And they would end up having a conversation with him, asking for directions, and then talk about this Earl guy who doesn't exist. He's not a real employee. He's not a real person. But that was another example. So yeah, I could go on and on, but I'll stop there.
So those are the normal ones. What are the normal ones? Not normal ones?
All right. Well, one thing I explain to people is that to keep people in the Illuminati, they would have to use what I call dangling carrots. So they would have to incentivize you. Unless you were an evil socio-psychopath who liked it, they would have to incentivize you in a lot of cases. So with me, one of my incentives, one of the dangling carrots would be things like cryptids. I was always curious, like when I would hear these stories, like how many of these things actually do exist? And so what I ended up finding out is that a lot of these things, if not just about every one that we've ever come up with, has existed at some point in time, and they have either several of them or a copy of them captured somewhere. And so a lot of cryptids that people would name, I've actually, you know, been able to go to a facility and see. And that sounds just insane and far-fetched, and that's why I call it not a normal one, right? But yeah, those things, that's kind of the weirdest for me.
Are you familiar with a gentleman named Stuart Swerdlow?
I am.
Your story is remarkably... I used to have a podcast in 2016, and he was a guest. Tried to get him on this one, but he basically wanted to see us get a little bit bigger. I don't know. So I'm going to reach out to him eventually again soon. However, your story is remarkably similar to his.
Yeah. It's similar, yeah. You might not want to mention me if you're going to ask him on again. I don't think he likes me very much. But yeah, he's so one of the things that I did when I worked for what people call the Illuminati was you could call it disinformation, is we would contact various researchers and we would tell them things. The idea of all, you could Google right now the 13 bloodlines of the Illuminati and you would find them, but we gave them to that author as an example. And there's a lot of other authors in the conspiracy land who got their information from insiders, self-proclaimed, and those insiders were people like me under a different name.
That makes sense why your stories would be similar then, because he might have been fabricating.
Not even. I'm not. That's not what I'm even implying. It's similar because that's kind of how it works, right? It's a lot of the time, like in his case, it's a family thing, right? So if your family was involved and you exhibit any of those extrasensory perceptions, they've got you. You're already there, right? So that's the part that a lot of the similarities come from. And again, it's very compartmentalized. So kind of from the level that I'm talking from where a lot of other people speak from, it is a couple steps down the pyramid, so to speak, as well.
Gotta backtrack there to the cryptids. I'm surprised you didn't jump right on it, Mike. So basically it was like, all right, Shane, you tell us about this spirit realm and we'll show you the Bigfoot. And then you got to go see a facility. So which ones did you see that confirmed? Like, can you tell us which ones are bullshit, which ones were real?
Yeah, you'd have to start naming them to me for me to be able to say which ones are bullshit, because
Mothman.
Was that Mothman? Almost. There's a creature that is like that, or there have been creatures that are like that. They do have one in captivity. They think one's still in the wild, but if you were to cross Mothman with Jeepers Creepers, you'd be a lot closer to reality. The creature from Jeepers Creepers, yeah.
Dogman.
This is I think that was something that the military created, that probably got away on them because they've done a lot of chimera experimentation. Even Alex Jones has talked about that. I think that's what the dogmen are. And then obviously that's a kind of almost like a modern version of a werewolf,
right? Which
comes from something very similar, but instead of using technology to do that, actually, no, I guess it's still technology, but it's a mix of genetics, basically. Whereas a lot of, like, when we think of a werewolf, we think of like a man that shapeshifts into a werewolf, right? But these were just werewolves that were bigger, had a tendency to get up on 2 feet, kind of had a little bit more of a muscular shape to their upper body than their lower body, and used to run wild. So
Loch Ness Monster and similar sea creatures.
Yeah, there's been many of them, actually. There's probably still a bunch out there, but they've captured most of the ones that they could, anyways. You remember, you might not know, but in the 80s, they sent Jacques Cousteau after the Loch Ness Monster, and Jacques Cousteau saw something and then couldn't find it again, and everything went cold after that, and everyone just believed it was bullshit. But they were like, oh, he found it, let's go get it. And that's what happened in that situation. So, but yeah, Canada was full of them. We had like Ogopogo, Manipogo, Igapogo, a whole variety of them. And then I'm forgetting the name of the part of ocean off the coast of BC where they still think that there's water serpents. They're giant, water snakes, basically, or ocean snakes, sea serpents. That's the word I'm looking for.
What about mantis, those large mantis creatures?
Like the alien mantids?
Yeah, they supposedly there's a lot of people that have actually seen like what look like giant praying mantises. Yeah, they look similar in the head to greys, yeah.
Yeah, it's usually an abduction experience that people are seeing those. So the abduction experience, it might be a whole other conversation because it's a pretty messy thing, because we have basically what now gets referred to, I think, in the public as MILABs, which is military abductions. And those were mostly staged as UFO abductions. And basically they would kidnap you, do a bunch of testing, usually with drugs, things like DMT, before everybody was doing DMT recreationally, things like DMT and abuse. And our memory of that, as our memories do, ended up kind of programming that into these various aliens. And that's where most of it comes from. So in terms of there actually being like mantis beings running around on planet Earth, that's not a fact.
What about Bigfoot?
So that would be, so if you were to take that Anunnaki story of them splitting the natural hominid of planet Earth with other alien genetics to create us, that was the natural hominid. So we tend to call them Neanderthal. So basically, they're just an older version of us that lived and survived, alongside us, definitely until that 13,000 years ago and beyond that, probably still up to the current day. And, a lot of the arguments are like, why don't we find them? Why don't we find the dead? Why don't we find their poop? Why don't we find all these different things? Well, because they're not just stupid animals, and they've evolved with this planet, and they know where we are long before we know where they are. And they've also, figured out how to stay away from us, such as coming out at night where we don't see too well, and they do. And when it comes to like psychic abilities, which I know a lot of the people who chase Bigfoot always talk about them like disappearing and stuff like that. They can't disappear, but they sure can convince you that they did. So yeah, basically it's just a species of, I don't want to call them human, but humanoid that is natural to this planet and exists in very small numbers still. But I've heard, we have a hard time getting news out of places like China and Russia, right? So there's like stories throughout Russia of like small villages of them where they wear clothes and have like a legal system and things like that even. Places in China where you learn about Sasquatch as if it's a bear that you have to avoid in the woods, right? So, yeah.
It's crazy because so much of what you're saying, it jives with so many other things that I've heard. Like, for instance, David Politis, he does the Missing 411, and he has done DNA samples on Bigfoot, and he has been trying to tell everybody for the last decade or so that it's not an ape, it's an offshoot of the human species, as you said. Yeah, man, just the more you talk, the more everything that I've learned from different people, just kind of, it all is making a little bit more sense. It's kind of spooky.
Yeah, and David's work is another one where that's kind of an example of where we create a conspiracy snowball sometimes by trying to make it like all those people are missing just because of Bigfoot or just because of aliens or just because of any one thing, where it's actually a large combination of things. These programs that I was talking about as well, I was participating in them, but I'd say the majority, definitely more than half of the humans used in these programs, they were kind of abducted from their beds and brought in and drugged and kept in a facility for a week and then sent home on drugs again and woke up not really knowing what was going on. And then they end up recovering their memories through dreams or little fragments that come back. And then they hear stories about aliens and they hear other things and they can end up filling in all those missing spaces with things that they hear from other people as well, which is a lot of where the similarities between a lot of the stories does come from, is like other people hearing other people's stories and filling in those gaps. But that doesn't rule out the fact that there's a phenomenon there to begin with. And something that, for myself speaking in the alternative community, I've always kind of pointed out that is the case, that for a lot of the people who are participating, they're deliberately misled as to what was going on. They're deliberately made to believe it was aliens or made to believe they were taken in a craft and things like that, because once again, that keeps the humans out of the picture and will never get the people actually involved in trouble. But from that perspective, I can understand why they remember things the way that they do, because one of the things that the programs has is incredibly advanced technology beyond what we even still today would believe that they have. It's starting to very quickly come out into the public now, and a lot of it has to do with virtual reality type of technology. So where they're actually at with the ability to put you in a simulation is way beyond what they would admit right now. However, I would say that all the components to make the simulations are in the mainstream right now. They're just isolated. So if you take Neuralink over here and you take a lot of this other technology that they're talking about being able to read songs from a person's brain or put a song into a person's brain, this other technology where they're hearing Orca language, and this other one where they're experimenting with, if you just put it all together, we have the Matrix already. We have the ability to give us such a potent simulation that we do believe it's real. So a lot of these people who are claiming that they were in these different super soldier programs, secret space programs, abductions, things like that, really they've just been run through these very high level virtual reality simulations while also on drugs, which is what doesn't allow them to be able to distinguish that from real life. And they recover this all in memory, mostly triggered by hearing people speak online, and then it ends up all kind of fitting into the same box for that reason. But that's where it comes from, is that these programs, they used a lot of unwitting people, and the point that I started on is that not all of those people came back, right? So meaning that they did, kill people, not just intentionally, but also very accidentally, while running all these experiments on people as well.
There's been a lot of mass UFO sightings, like the Ariel School in Africa, Roswell, just the Varginha incident in Brazil. Are these largely orchestrated by the government as a psyop?
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, the one question I always get people to ask about the one in Brazil is who recovered it, right? It was the United States military. If you were Brazil, would you let the United States military come in and, no, you'd be keeping that for yourself, right? You'd be like, no, we found this is ours, unless you knew it was the Americans already and you had to let them come get it back, right? And a lot of the other cases, I think, are very similar. I did a podcast recently where someone told me a story I didn't know actually about, I think they call it the Alabama Metal Man. And when he showed me the pictures of the Alabama Metal Man, like that is NASA's Mercury spacesuit just about 25 years before we saw it through NASA, right? And to me, that just sounds like one of their programs that got away from them. Somebody saw it and reported on it, and they did their best to cover it up by making it seem like it was aliens from outer space as opposed to just their highly hidden technology. It's the same thing because in the late 80s and early 90s, everyone was seeing these giant triangle crafts, and then we got the stealth bomber, right? So it's the same thing, and it's going on right now as well with the UAP stuff that they're coming out in the media. This is just what you would call a slow disclosure of technologies we're not supposed to know that they have.
What do you think will be the next big psyop? We had the big joy, as you called it, the pandemic, the current blue beam stuff that they're pushing out that you just mentioned too. What do you anticipate is the next attack for the sheeple?
I hate to say these things because it can kind of make them happen, but the way that they operate, they always have several balls in the air, as I put it, and whichever one makes the most sense at that moment, they use. And so it could be a variety of things. Technologies like blue beam aren't there, but that'd be really hard for them to pull off, to be honest. And I think enough of us talk about it that we wouldn't be convinced, right? And I think doing something exactly like the Joy would be the same. However, what I'm worried about them doing is because they're trying to push this treaty through with WHO to basically have those pandemic emergency powers whenever they feel like it, right? Simultaneously, the Biden administration keeps making this huge deal out of how mental health is health, and that we're having a mental health epidemic, and that people who, support MAGA or are on that side of things are mentally ill, right? And a problem. So I'm worried that the next version of that we're going to see is going to be something like that. And that could be caused in a variety of different ways. Some kind of points that could play into this is something similar to this announcement that the Vatican's supposed to do about a rise in supernatural events and supernatural perceptions. They've been running this thing in the media about people seeing demon face as an example. And along with all of the, increase in UAP sightings, all of the different deep fake videos and everything going on, I just think that the next scamdemic, as you put it, will have something to do with, nothing even physical, and just somewhere like your opinions are wrong, basically, and therefore you're mentally ill.
Oh yeah, I could see it with some hate speech bills, and then they just say whatever's hate speech is, you're criminal for thinking it or saying it or posting it, whatever it may be. And so you said the Vatican is going to, or they made an announcement or tried to get people prepared for increased supernatural activity. When was that?
Just recently. I don't think it's even happened yet. They just announced it recently. So the last time they did something like this was back in 2008, where they started talking about aliens, the potential for aliens, and how they would baptize aliens. Now they're doing the same thing. So there's a bunch of factors in here, like, the decriminalization of a lot of psychedelics and getting people like microdosing mushrooms and stuff like that a lot. A lot of people are altering their perceptions on a regular basis. We also have this broadband technology that flows through the air on frequencies that we can't see, taste, or touch, and can affect our perceptions, that has a number and a letter. And our cell phones are all connected to it. We're speaking over it right now. And that type of technology actually does have the ability to read and write what's going on in here. So, their ability to even do something where, like mass hallucinations, they have the technology in place now. So prior to QAnon, going all the way back to about 2010, one of the first things I tried to warn conspiracy researchers about was QAnon, that this was coming, that they were going to do this, and it was going to capture a lot of conspiracy theorists. And this was going to be a problem because it was going to become an excuse to criminalize conspiracy theorists and call them domestic terrorists. And then QAnon happened, and here we are. So I have a feeling that they're setting up for the next evolution of that. And I don't think it'll be quite as simple as QAnon, although I'm sure QAnon will be back and involved, but something like that. And it could be just, I made the joke when the United States elected George W. Bush the second time that this proves that 56% of Americans are crazy. And that was a joke at the time, but you could make that not a joke in a hurry if that election goes the wrong way.
I can totally see that playing out too. Hopefully not spoken into existence, but who knows? Everybody within our community knows that this year was probably going to be kind of crazy, and it hasn't really disappointed.
Yeah. And they also just dropped, how they do predictive programming. Well, you guys have probably bumped into that. So they put things in movies that, we say it predicts the future, but it really doesn't. It conditions us to play out a certain future. So they'll show us a scenario, they'll show us the actors responding in a certain way, and then we are programmed to respond in that way too. So there was a pretty popular Netflix series that just went by, Three Body Problem, which is based on a great book, but the series is also great. If you guys haven't seen it, you probably should. And that came up in that it's supposed to be like a couple years from now or whatever, and they were saying that basically they were having this massive lockdown because of a mental health crisis.
Oh wow. And then the whole train derailment thing was in a bunch of movies, and that happened, and it seems like that keeps happening.
The boat hitting the bridge there in Baltimore right after Leave the World Behind, with that boat scene, things like that. I'm sure you guys have seen it with The Simpsons. It looks like some of that artwork is kind of inspired by that as well, right? They've predicted all sorts of things that have happened, and that's how it works. It's not so much that they're letting us know ahead of time that that's going to happen, but that's how culture creation works. That's how magic works. It's a combination of imagination, will, and conviction. They feed our imagination. Our will is all over the place because we're all, we have way too many emotions, and then through our actions the world gets created. And and so a big part of what we're kind of enduring through them is that they've kind of trained people that your perception is reality and your feelings are all that matter, and you should just act on them. And so everyone's kind of throwing thought out the window and throwing logic and reason out the window. And that's a problem because they teach something that's actually called the trivium method, which used to be part of our education system. And that orders things in thinking, feeling, and acting in that way. They call it grammar, logic, rhetoric. In computer sciences, it's still there, input, processing, output. Right. And that's the way that we're supposed to be doing things. But they've got everyone up in their feelings now, and everyone's operating from like the heart chakra, if you will. And because we're doing that, we're not thinking things through properly. We're just going towards what our feelings are telling us. And, the unfortunate part of being human that is difficult is our feelings are not true just because they're there. Right? We have emotional reactions to things that aren't even there, and we have feelings about things that aren't happening. So it's a power that we have, but it's a power that no one's ever really taught us how to use. And at this point in time, a lot of the problems we see in the world are a reflection of them removing that order from us, where now they've got us all up in our feelings and acting from them, and we're slowly destroying the world. So
yeah, I've never heard it put that way. I like that.
What 3 books would you recommend for somebody that was a novice in the area but really wanted to take, some deep dives?
I don't know, man. Whenever anyone asks me about books, I tell people to read Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, because, there's not only the history of the organization we've been talking about. A lot of the things about how culture creation and history shaping works are in there. And it's a deep dive into how magic actually works as well. You know, a lot of the time I would again point to fiction. I would point to something like even the Celestine prophecy will open your eyes to a lot of things. Lord of the Rings, you know, a very popular one as an example. In terms of like the non-fiction books out there that a lot of these authors are writing, like I always just say read everything. You know, I wouldn't point anything to anyone. If I were to like say who the best conspiracy researcher was based on what I know and what I've heard them say, haven't listened to him too much over the last few years, but Michael Tessarion is a great resource. Excellent researcher. He's very close on a lot of different things. And yeah, I think that's the best I could do with that question.
To kind of backtrack a little, you mentioned vampires, and I know that that could kind of fall into a cryptid. And then there's the adrenochrome, if we can even say that, or, you know, the whole blood magic ritual aspect that goes into it, and, you know, trying to stay young. And is there anything to vampires and vampirism?
Yes. It's not, you know, exactly like the fiction, but I was kind of hoping not to go this deep into things, but I did write it into my blog, so I guess we'll talk about it. So at the top of the Illuminati it started with 13 individuals, one for each of the bloodline. It expanded over time, but that's where it started. And each one of those has what we might call a life extension technique that allows them to not be immortal in, like, you know, the fictional, but they don't die, they don't grow old, they don't die and beyond what they were. And one of those versions, one of those life extension techniques is very similar to what we call vampires. Not the Dracula sense, but again, more close to the Anne sense. I kind of keep bringing that up because a lot of these like bigger authors and stuff, they end up coming from, you know, that's what I could be doing right now if I had a stayed in, as an example. I could be someone whose name you know in the same vein as like a J.K. Rowling's or a Terrence Howard or you know, like a David Icke maybe, right? Like someone like that is kind of what they were grooming me for, because that's how they do it. A magician has to show you their hand, basically. Part of what they think absolves their karma for all this nonsense is that they tell us what they're going to do before they do it. They tell us how they do what they're doing, and whether or not we see it is up to us. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek because they usually show us in fiction, or I should say they show us in fiction. But that's why I would say something like reading the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice would probably be more educational than a lot of nonfiction books that are out there.
You mentioned Terrence Howard, and we're recording this maybe 3 or 4 days after he was on the Rogan podcast.
I brought it up.
And I texted Tom last night. I was 15 minutes into it, and I'm like, dude, you gotta listen to this. I listened to the whole thing, all 3 hours. So you brought him up, but I'm not sure in what sense. Is he a part of these organizations, or is he a whistleblower like yourself?
No, he would be influenced by these organizations, like where his ideas are coming from. Are kind of coming from that, and just like what we're going through right now on a global sense, all this control from the Illuminati and these powers that be aside, we're going through an evolution as a species, and those of us who are kind of like in line with that are going one way, and the rest of us are kind of going into this new version of human that's all technology, transhumanisms. We could talk about that in terms of the lollipop, right? Like that kind of a division. That is why we're seeing these things, and it's because of this evolution. So we're having a rise in consciousness, and a lot of different people are figuring a lot of truth out just simply because of that. So someone like Terrence, I don't even know would be controlled in any sort of way. He could have just come across that through this mechanism of this evolution, this rise of the consciousness. I keep trying to call it by its real name, but I don't want to piss off any Christians. But this rise in consciousness that we're going through, you know, it allows us to see through the veil a little bit more. It allows us to understand and know the truth. It's got us more in touch with our own soul outside of here and the planet itself and the nature of the whole universe. And so I think that that's why something like that is coming out. And why I kind of brought him up in that context is just because of, you know, how that information is getting controlled. But what he's pointing to is that older version of technology, or that older pathway to technology that I was talking about. Same thing with Tesla, right? And in some way they will be bringing that back. And so someone like Terrence is kind of like this just little nugget to slowly prepare us towards new pathways to technology. Usually when they're making a big deal of something, it's because they have a new technology coming to fix it. So when you see like a rise in cancer, it's because there's a new technology coming along to fix it. When you, I was thinking of another one just before that, but yeah, these different things, because the energy crisis, it's because they have a new pathway for energy that they're getting ready to bring out in the public. And yeah, problem, reaction, solution, like Tom said earlier.
Is it 0 point energy that they're going to be unrolling here?
Yeah, it's going to be bioelectric energy. We're going to power things.
And that's probably got something to do with climate change that they've been pushing into, huh?
Yeah. What was the phrase? We are the carbon they want to reduce. But yeah, like things like Neuralink, DARPA has put out these various pills that work based on your own like bioelectric signal, and that's like what the battery gets charged by. This technology that they're building these, the common name 15-minute cities out of, with this new graphene infused concrete that also not only it conducts electricity basically, so instead of having to run wires, they can just run it straight through the concrete. The other part of it is that our kinetic energy of living within it, because we all have an energy field that like radiates energy, is actually feeding all of that, almost like we're feeding a battery that will then get sold back to us, which is pretty hilarious. But yeah, that's the next direction that they're going, where we will be the power for things. I'm pretty sure some cell phones are already working like that, where if you hold them, you can charge them. But I'm not sure.
For whatever reason, when you mentioned energy fields, I thought of this, and it kind of has nothing to do with energy fields, but for whatever reason, it sparked this in my head. When I was a young man in the late 90s, I was dating this girl, and she had a family friend. She was Japanese. She had a family friend named Akira, who was a prisoner in the American concentration camps during the war. And this man had the craziest, like, crystal eyes that, like, he didn't look normal, and he was I didn't believe it at the time, but he was supposedly someone who could see auras in people and see their different colors and their energy fields, and he made these several predictions. But, I was 17 years old, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I didn't really believe it too much then. But the older I've gotten, the more I realized he was probably right on. And the question I got for you, it took a long way getting there, is can you see energy fields, or is that a real thing? Or not energy fields, but auras?
Well, we all have an energy field. It's about 3.5 meters in diameter, or about 6 feet across. Stay 6 feet apart. When our energy fields overlap with each other, there's an energy exchange. All energy is also information. So even just being in proximity to each other, we're kind of telepathically communicating on some level. Hence, stay 6 feet apart when we're trying to lie to you all. But yeah, that's just, I think the Heart Math Institute has even quantified it scientifically. They call it electromagnetic field that the heart puts off, but that's only one of 3 aspects of what actually makes up the field that we all have. Some people see that as an aura that is more tight to the body, but technically it's more of kind of like an orb or a spheroid torsion field around us. And if we were to, take all the matter away and just see each other as we are, that's probably more akin to what we actually would look like, or these orbs of light, if you will, a light of information and consciousness.
Do you know anything about the colors of the auras? Like, did they mean different things? Can you see them? Did you ever learn, what the different colors or?
Yeah, it's our energy. We have this like very massive spectrum of emotions, right? Everything from love to fear, and all these different denominations in between. And very similar to stuff like Terrence was just talking about, a lot of frequencies can also be ascribed to a sound or a color, right? And so when you're seeing things on that way, even within our energy field right now, there's all these like different spirals of color, and each one of those colors does represent a different emotion that we've had throughout the day, or a different feeling that has come up in us. And so if you have that perception isolated to just an aura, that would probably look like it's almost changing colors, similar to a mood ring or something like that, where it's like if the person's angry, it goes red, or arbitrarily, or if they're, scared, it goes a different color or something like that. But it's about perception, and people perceive things in different ways, but the signals are the same, basically, is what they're picking up. Different clairvoyance. Some of them just see like a shape or a shadow where a ghost is, and some of us see full definition. But either way, we're both seeing something in the same place, right? And that when it comes to seeing subtle energy like that, it's different for different people. And I actually encourage that, which is a thing within magical teachings that is discouraged, right? Like the guided meditations where sit the way I tell you to, breathe the way I tell you to, visualize what I tell you to. You're a martial artist. Add what is specifically your own is always an important part. And that's something that we need to do when it comes to these spiritual abilities, is not be so hung up on, is the way that I'm seeing it correct? Because Tom said he saw it differently, right? No, the way that you're seeing it is the way that you see it. There's something there, and that's the way you're identifying it. And that's important. And part of the thing that we get discouraged by that keeps us away from it, to be honest.
And how it's almost like when people are totally closed off to the belief of something like that they never would have an experience like that, and they kind of want to stay there too. Like, if I don't think about it, it won't happen. If it's not out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, conviction is that what we're convinced of at the end of the day is, a big part of what we experience, a big part of what happens. And if you don't have anything to base that on, and you're just following what everybody else is telling you, then we end up with this collective reality that we have, where unfortunately the majority of those are doing it, and those of us who see it in a different way are the minority now. But if we can switch the sides, if you will, or turn those tides, if you will, then it will change as well. And that's how we get big changes in the world. And when I talked about the evolution we're going through, I believe that that's where this leads. As dark as it kind of sounds to say that they're trying to strip all of our natural ability and sell it back to us as technology, the end result of that is we're going to see the technology and be reminded of the truth and be reminded of reality. I thought about this listening to a Joe Rogan podcast the other day with the gentleman talking about simulation theory, because the way that he's describing things, this is kind of how the universe works. It's kind of how each planet works. It's just he's subscribing it to like some type of computer, whereas maybe it's just some form of consciousness that we don't understand, right? But the principles and the way that it's rendering for all of us almost individually would still all be true. So that's a way that I believe that we're building these simulations out the way that we are, so that we can get more in touch with the way that this particular planet actually does work.
I'm pretty sure, I'm almost positive I know your answer, but it's been kind of a thing of mine lately to ask our guests, are you a flat earther? I am not.
No, I understand the perception of it, and it falls very much into what I was just talking about. It's an organic technology. It's not solid the way that we think it is, and it is responding to consciousness, and therefore we can alter things. And so what I always point out to people is when they make video games, they can't get those 3D physics right either, right? And so when our brain is processing all of this, we don't quite see it right, but there's enough proof in the results to know that this isn't a flat earth. So
I'm not sure. I don't know what we're on. Do you think it is a ball then, and what NASA tells us, and we're spinning millions of miles through space?
Still not exactly, right? And I don't know. It would probably be a whole other podcast for me to go too deep into this, but a lot of the spinning is, let's say, incorrect, but most of it is right. There's a fundamental misunderstanding there. Some of the stuff that Terrence was coming out with, as an example, Tesla came out with as well. Many other people besides him. I was just using him because it's like a new in the zeitgeist, right? That guy coming out with that stuff. That's a lot closer to it. There's this element of frequency and sound that we haven't quite quantified enough to control yet, and definitely not enough to explain to each other yet.
I think that's like the biggest, or one of the biggest technologies from the past that we've lost, is the sound frequency technology. I mean, I'm sure they have it, but the general people don't,
Yeah, when you look at the most ancient languages, it's basically singing, right? And there's a reason for that. And anyone who plays music or listens to music knows that there's magic there, right? So that's undeniable.
What do you think is the earliest languages? Because I know there's a lot of different theories of what came first or what it sounded like.
In modern times, I wouldn't even know, to be honest. Yeah, I think they all kind of came out around the same time, which is probably why they all fight about it, right? I think that line that's in the book's not exactly true, but the idea of like confuse their languages so that they can't talk to each other. I think that did happen, and it just happened basically with the formation of this Illuminati. When I was talking about them sending out people to kind of share information, that's when the languages, as we know them today, were all ended up being formed. And that's a control structure in and of itself, because even if you get into some old forms of Arabic, there's been people who've been able to change the color of a flame on a candle by saying different words, right? There's an aspect to that. We see it in orcas, we see it in dolphins, we see it in humpback whales, we see it in all kinds of birds, all kinds of different things. If you have a guitar, drop it into 432 hertz and tell me you don't feel a difference, right? There's literally a harmonic there that doesn't exist in 440. And yeah, these are all, that's a old pathway of technology.
Well, Shane, you are amazing, my man, and we are so happy to have people like you around, and especially we are happy to have people like you that are willing to come on shows like ours and just kind of tell what you can. But we absolutely appreciate it, man. I know I learned a fucking ton, and I'd love to have you back. I'm sure Tom would too.
Definitely gonna have to do it again.
Yeah, man, anytime. Would love to talk to you about like martial arts, actually, and how magic and martial arts used to be connected, and they've been separated for a reason. That's why we have McDojo life in our genetic memory.
Yeah,
you know?
that would be an amazing episode. We should definitely talk about that next time, because I've been feeling that more and more, and I even have a video on my YouTube channel called "Wrestling is a Spiritual Ritual," and yeah, I think that's gonna be the next one.
Yeah, cool.
Is there anything you're working on, like that you'd like to promote?
Well, I mean, if you guys put the beginning of the link tree URL up there after the /Shane_Sedore, you'll find all my links. I do have a Patreon channel because I don't like dealing with the general public in this conspiracy world anymore, and so I put the paywall there to be like, at least you're not an asshole if you're gonna come in and pay for it. But I do everything there in terms of podcasting. I do 5 or 6 of them a month. A whole backstory to all of this stuff that goes into a lot more detail. There's a fictional blog out there called the Ruiner blog you could read. I wrote that, and it's got all of this information coded in it as well. And if anybody is interested, I do teach what I do in terms of magic, because all of the different things that I learned how to do, I choose not to do. But it's a muscle, and if you lose your muscle, it's really hard to get it back. It took a long time to develop that muscle, and you don't want to lose it, right? So what I developed for myself a number of years ago was kind of a way that I could practice magic without doing magic. I call it practicing in safety mode, kind of like on a computer, how you can download a new program and try it out in safety mode without damaging your computer. Same type of thing. And so this is all the things that I learned through them that I've kind of modified in my own way. And I now teach other people. It's like a one-on-one class. The price is $333 because that's a fun number. And we do it over 3 different calls, one-on-one. That way I know at the end of each call you understand everything, and I can put it in words that you understand and that kind of thing, as opposed to teaching a class who people might be afraid to ask questions, right? But yeah, that's about that.
Fucking Shane Sedore. And if you listen to this and you were a little unclear on why we had him, previous guest, Mike Turpin, the psychedelic athlete, he recommended him, and boy, he didn't disappoint, brother.
That was definitely one of the more wild ones that we've had. And like I asked him, normally when we ask these type of questions, we're reaching or trying to pull something out of him, but we already know this guy's gonna have some crazy stuff to tell us. And when he mentioned the cryptids and the vampires and shit, it was at least on my end, a pretty captivating episode.
Dude, yeah, no, this was awesome. I mean, it was just like you and me were just like asking him questions, and he was just going. And I don't know if I don't know what to think. I don't know what to think, but I will say this. I do try to stay pretty level-headed, even though I do believe in a lot of fucking conspiracies. But a lot of what he was saying, like when I asked, hey, do you know who Stuart Swerdlow is? He knew exactly who he was, and he even corroborated a lot of what Stuart said. And one of the things he was saying I wanted to ask him and didn't get a chance to was when he was explaining the abductions and the drug induced and how they're gone for a few days and then these memories start coming. That's the Travis Walton story. That's Fire in the Sky. You know? I mean, everything he was saying, it's like the David Paulides thing. It's like I've heard from somewhere before. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying that as that adds credence to Shane. So,
no, yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, everything he said was just tying together a lot of conspiracy stuff that, you know, it would have come from insiders or people like him to even reach the public. Like, oh, these cults, these occult people, the, you know, the beliefs. Like, I have a pretty good idea of what I think the so-called elites believe and like what kind of like occult stuff they're up to. And yeah, pretty much spot on what he said.
It's like the Canadian Stranger Things, don't you know?
There's definitely a lot of Canadians like him, I've noticed, and it makes sense because their government is completely pussy and annoying and like invasive. It's like a little bit worse America.
You know, I recorded the Zoom meeting as soon as we got on, and we were just kind of bullshitting a little bit, you know, waiting for you. And we talked a little bit about politics and being in Canada and Trudeau and yeah, maybe we'll try to tie that in there. But yeah, I asked him basically, hey, from down here, fucking Trudeau looks like a clown. You know, I'm sure it's different, and like I'm sure the spin is different up there. And he essentially said, yeah, he's a fucking goof, and unless you're a liberal, of course. But yeah, man, Canada used to be a place. Now, okay, I can't go there. I'm a felon, right? But it used to be a place that I really wanted to go to, and now that I can't, I don't even feel bad because of the way that country, where it's headed. You know what I mean? Like it's falling fast, bro.
Hopefully we're not right behind them.
I definitely think we're fucking behind them. Maybe in front of them.
Maybe in some ways, yeah. What do you think was the craziest thing Shane said?
Fuck, dude. The craziest thing he said? Oh my gosh. Okay. I don't know. I would obviously have to probably listen to it 4 or 5 times to really identify the craziest thing, but I'll tell you one of the craziest things that I always have a hard time grappling with is the reptilian thing. No one wants to believe that they're real more than me. I just have a hard time believing that there is reptilian shapeshifters that are really walking around. Maybe having a hard time is the wrong way, because it's not really that far-fetched in my mind. However, that's just one of the ones I do have a difficult time kind of grasping or buying into, if you will. But he says it like he knows it. He says that it's happening.
The reptilians was always one of the easiest to believe because it's one of the coolest sounding.
Oh, definitely the coolest sounding, dude. Definitely.
I mean, it almost gives them a little bit too much power, though, when you consider, like he was saying, though, blaming some type of a off-world entity instead of just these piece of shit people who are behind it.
Maybe the craziest thing that he said was the Atlantis, how the spaceship Atlantis came down and then they called the civilization Atlantis. I definitely think that some folks may have came down, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, a lot of what he said, I do buy into. It's just, I don't know, man. This podcast was spooky in a way because of what he was saying. It was informative. It was spooky. It was kind of like an amalgamation of all these kind of different feelings, you know?
I can honestly say it was probably the creepiest one we've done in a way, just because it did feel like, oh shit, no, this guy's been there and seen that and done that, which is how calculated and just nonchalantly talking about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely gonna have to do a McDojo martial arts one with him.
Oh yeah. I was gonna ask him too. I was gonna be kind of it was gonna kind of be like a fucking goof at the end. I was gonna be like, hey, before we let you go, probably the most important question: who's the best Canadian MMA fighter of all time? Because if he says anybody besides George St. Pierre, you know what though? So Shane, he left when he was like 18, 19. He said. Yeah. He was able to leave successfully. He tried once before and it didn't work out well. He probably had to stay away from a lot of pedophiles.